really like the idea of Murdoch doing a temple of type of story, this Indiana Jonesy kind of thing, in our own sort of Murdoch way.
The genesis of this was, we were told there was some kind of temple that was north of Toronto. So we did a Google search for temple north of Toronto, and we found the Tommy Foster Memorial. It looks like the Hagia Sophia. And I thought, well, okay, what would be at the Hagia Sophia except the Holy Grail? So maybe Murdoch's looking for the Holy Grail. I actually read the Da Vinci Code. What I loved about it is the idea that they had this guy named Joseph of Arimathea actually bringing the Grail to England. And I figured if you can bring the Grail to England, you can bring the Grail anywhere.
Well, I think the writers did a good job of posing the whole, it has to be somewhere. So why would it be in Ontario? Well, why not? Why else would this building be in the middle of the woods, north of Markham, a place full of booby traps? It has to be somebody built it for some reason.
It's working.
Iris! So here we are in Uxbridge, Ontario, about an hour away from Toronto. We're at this strange mausoleum that was erected here, donated by a very prominent person in Toronto history.
Thomas Foster was mayor of Toronto for 25, 26, and 27. He was an alderman, a comptroller. He served many, many different roles in Toronto, but he invested in real estate, and that's where he made his money. Enough money to build the Thomas Foster Memorial. After Thomas's wife died, he made a trip to India. He saw the Taj Mahal and found out it was built in memory of someone's wife there. So he wanted to do the same thing here. Thomas Foster Memorial was built in 1936 for $250,000. Now that $250,000 went into limestone on the outside, solid marble imported from Italy and India on the inside, terrazzo floors, and 22-karat gold mosaics.
It's quite cool to step inside. You sort of step back in time.
It's like beautiful and ominous at the same time, which I think is sort of perfect for the tone that we were trying to set up.
We found a great temple, but it was carefully manicured. There were green lawns and manicured trees all around it. It was our responsibility to age the temple and to place it within a better, more grown-in environment. We began building a forest around it, both using CG trees and some elements that we photographed on the same day that we were at the temple. We did blue screen elements of branches, foliage in the foreground. We also painted up the temple itself with a more aged look, some weathering and some vines. So the final shot has quite a lot of the frames modified in order to make it look grown in and treed all around. Because we were shooting in a real temple, we had a real solid tiled floor, which was beautiful, but we couldn't change it. It had to stay as it was. We were actually able to find some patterns within the existing tile mosaic that looked like they could be turned into a button. In order to do that, we shot elements of the actors simply pressing as though it were a button. And then we cut out the tiles and we animated them sinking along with some dust and shadows in the right place so it would look realistically like the button was sinking.
Part of the storyline involves a secret passageway where they find the Holy Grail. Of course, we had a good location that gave us the temple, but without a secret passageway. Of course, the passageway had to contain and be designed for several features, such as blades coming through walls, rings of fire, and so on and so forth.
We worked a lot with the art department to conceive of a corridor that would be narrow enough for Murdoch and Iris to sort of pin themselves in and would contain practical grooves that our CG blades could run along. We built our own corridor in CG. We put CG characters into the positions and we pre-visualized a few shots where we had the blades first emerging, and we worked on the camera angles that would tell the story best. Something like a CG blade looks best when it comes really close to camera and it narrowly misses the viewer. It really places you inside the scene.
What have we, Dr. Grace?
Male, early 40s, murder victim.
You pulled him out of the river this morning.
Isn't it also possible he simply drowned?
I'm quite confident in my supposition.
We are in a beautiful place called Rockwood Conservation Area, just outside of Guelph.
We're located at 161 Fall Street, south in Rockwood, Ontario, which is about an hour west of Toronto. We're not too far away, but we look like we're way up north. The park has some beautiful limestone bluffs and cliffs, ancient cedar trees, 500 years old, growing out of the sides of the cliffs. We have the Aramosa River carving through the center of it. Sets a nice backdrop. Visitors love to come to this park to enjoy the hiking. We have about 3.5 kilometers of hiking trails. People bike here as well. We have canoe rentals here. We have a beach for swimming for the kids and sun tanning.
It's always really nice, I mean, to get to go on location when you're shooting. It really creates the atmosphere.
So this is it then? This is the Holy Grail?
Well, we'll have to call in Milton Webb.
Pottery expert.
But, yes, I believe it is.
Just a total dream for me to have done that type of story growing up, so this is great. I love it.
It's a total what we do, isn't it? We take on these fantastical subjects, and it's great that the Holy Grail's turned up in Markham, Ontario. It should have turned up in Yorkshire, England, but you know. Can't have everything.
Most people, I think, are familiar with the great gold rushes in the San Francisco Gold Rush and the Klondike Gold Rush, and even to a lesser extent, the Caribou Gold Rush. What I found really interesting is that in terms of pulling money out of the ground, the Silver Rush up in Cobalt, it may not have dwarfed the rest of them, but certainly was a huge mineral find, which I thought was a very interesting story that not that many Ontarians know about, that we had a mineral rush and a frontier in northern Ontario.
The only thing that I knew about cobalt was the glass. I knew nothing about the silver mining.
Well, I didn't know that there was sort of a mini silver rush in northern Ontario. It's pretty interesting.
We're standing right here beside the Long Lake, which is Cobalt Lake now, which was named by Willett Green Miller, who was the provincial geologist at the time. He renamed the lake Cobalt Lake and also put the signpost just down the tracks here that said Cobalt Station.
Silver would have been a better name for cobalt. It's so misleading. But when they came up with the name, they didn't know silver was that plentiful, and they thought it would be better for nickel. And the ore was a combination of silver, nickel, arsenic, and cobalt. And because it was a pinkish tinge to the rock, which they called cobalt bloom, Miller came up with the name cobalt. In 1903, while the construction crews were putting the rail lines through, there were 3 people who made discoveries in that year, which was the finding of the silver and beginning of the boom.
James McKinley and Ernest Dare made a discovery right at the south end of the lake. Fred LaRose, he made the discovery at the north end of the lake, and just across the lake, on top of that hill, Louis Hébert made the 3rd discovery. The impact of those discoveries was amazing. Within a year, prospectors were here, a town was taking form, and everything was happening right on the railroad. You could hop on the train in Toronto and be in Cobalt overnight, and you were a part of a silver rush that was unheard of in the province, maybe even in the country.
I'd say it was the biggest boom ever in Canadian history. They produced more in value than the Klondike Gold Rush. They became the 3rd largest silver mine in the world, all in 13 square miles. The whole world knew about cobalt. In fact, the joke at the time was that Toronto was known as a stopover place where you changed trains to get the cobalt.
Years after the discovery, things just went crazy in cobalt. The town just boomed, but it didn't last long. It was a boom, and after 1911, the production of silver went down. But mining has been a part of cobalt till the late 1980s, when Agnico Eagle, which was the last mining company here, pulled out. We have one of the largest collections of native silver in Canada on display. We have a large number of artifacts of a social nature where we give a good background of how people lived, what type of things they did in the town. Also available at the museum is the underground mine tour. You can walk in a mine, you can feel like a miner. Even the smell, you can really experience that.
Obviously, one of the difficult things is travel to Cobalt, Ontario was not really a possibility with the show's shooting schedule and production demand. Rockwood filled in for some of the silver discovery sites. And what we did to recreate Haleyberry, which was the stepping off point for the Cobalt Silver Rush, is we used Westfield Pioneer Village.
Well, the village is located in the little town of Rockton, which is part of Hamilton, so about halfway between the city of Hamilton and the city of Cambridge. All of the buildings have been relocated on site here from all over southern Ontario. So we have about 45 buildings in all, and we represent the time period from the late 1700s all the way up to the early 1900s. We show trades, we have a blacksmith shop, a general store, a one-room schoolhouse, and lots of homes. So the cabinet maker will be in his shop, actually using the old planing tools and the different wood lathes. The blacksmith will be working in his shop. The ladies will be in the home, baking on the open hearth. There'll be lessons in the schoolhouse. We have a church, a railway station, and bringing in new buildings all the time. This is the Lockhart Farmstead area, so this is about 1830 is what we normally interpret it to. They'll be over at their train station and in the caboose itself, doing some filming there, and then they're also in our Daubeny Inn as, I think, the tavern.
Sir, you've no tie or collar.
No need, George.
This here's our guide. There aren't enough horses for all of us, but a couple donkeys should do the trick.
It's great to change things up a little bit. Our heroes are way up north, so we've got the different duds on. It's a little bit more of a survivor approach, making it work up in the woods.
Crabtree has decided that he doesn't sleep well without his own pillow from home, so very much not in the spirit of a rugged pioneering adventurer. As if Crabtree showing up with his own pillow didn't make him look foolish enough, he gets to ride an ass, a donkey. His real name is Kramer, so he has a lot of comedic flair. So it looks very ridiculous. My feet are only a couple of inches off the ground when I'm riding him. And Yannick is there looking very swashbuckling with his cowboy hat and real horse, and that is my lot in life, with my pillow and my ass.
Oh, what was that?
It's nature, George. Nothing more than that. Just nature.
Nature? I'm not sure I care for it.
We're always looking for new Victorian worlds that we haven't explored yet. So we started to think about, well, corsets. It's not something that exists anymore. It was a huge deal in the day. Our actresses have to wear them. And we just thought, what would be more interesting than getting into that world a little bit? And there was a movement at the time, the dress reform movement, which was all about changing the ways that women were forced to dress specifically. So we thought, what would be more perfect than for our suffragette characters to take on corsets as exactly that, emblematic of the struggle of women to break free of their bonds.
I think being a guy on this show is probably the better way out. First of all, you're wearing a suit, and secondly, it's custom made for you. Not a bad way to go.
Basically, every woman wore a corset for propriety. It was something that it created your silhouette, it kept everything together, it supported you in the way that a bra might support you today. It was form-fitting. So you needed a kind of foundation garment that would give you both the narrow waist that was fashionable, but also allowed the dressmaker to fit your clothing properly so that it kind of created a smooth line that was considered elegant. The design of corsets changed throughout the 19th century with technology. Earlier they would have been made with whalebone stays to create the shape, so it did have some flexibility. But then steel technology, just like the steel cage crinoline that supported skirts, you would also have steel boning in your corset. That was later replaced by steel springs that also, again, had some flexibility. The biggest problem with them is that they would hinder your breathing. They constricted your lungs. You wouldn't have been able to run a 100-yard dash in your corset very easily.
They're very tight and they're very uncomfortable, and they actually become quite frustrating to be in all day. There is a sort of, you get that feeling after all when you're in it that long, when you're trying to eat, when you're trying to sit.
It's horribly uncomfortable. You can't bend properly. There's all kinds of things you can't do.
I wouldn't wish corsets on my worst enemies, but I can tell you firsthand that they take your breath away, literally, so that you can never get a full breath. Can't digest food properly, your bodily functions aren't really working. It's a fascinating idea that women didn't go very far, perhaps in office and in responsible positions in their life. There's only so much you can do when you can't get a decent breath. You know? How capable can you really be?
Here we
we are in the Battersea Museum, which is located at the corner of St. George and Bloor in Toronto. And I'm standing in the exhibition Fashion Victims, The Pleasures and Perils of Dress in the 19th Century. And the exhibition actually looks at shifts in fashion and shifts in making of fashion across the 19th century.
We are aware of all of these garments that, like high heels and corsets, that mechanically altered the body. But men and women and children, and both the makers and the wearers, were in danger from various aspects of Victorian fashion. Your beautiful green dress might have been made with arsenic. The flower wreath you wore to the ball, same thing, would drip arsenic powder onto your shoulders. One of the most lethal things was actually fire death for women. Women wore beautiful, sort of gauzy, light fabrics. That was a great fire hazard around open fires, candles. Oscar Wilde's half-sisters both perished in a crinoline fire, as did Barbara Mackenzie of the Mackenzie family in Toronto in the 19th century.
I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. William, this corset is your killer.
We had to come up with the whole concept of how this corset was actually going to kill someone. The first thing was the actual fabric, and so to not make it out of what corsets would have been made of at the time. So I used what would have come in the future, which was heavy girdling, to create that sort of cinching effect, but still be able to move in it as opposed to a boned corset. And then we had to come up with what was going to be inside to actually make these women die from it. We used actual coiled boning that would have been used in corsets and created this whole sort of contraption that was built into it that would be attached to ratchets that would then close in on themselves and not undo again. I think it turned out really great. It looks, quite sexy when it's on, yet it's a huge departure from what the actual real corsets were of the period.
What we women put ourselves through, those dress reformers have a point.
And not taken to the extreme. A corset does serve a purpose.
Yes, but why should we feel the need to conceal supposed flaws? Why can't women just wear what they want and make their own choices? Dr. Grace is going through a really interesting season, a transition in herself. She's always been very certain of herself and headstrong, and I think this women's rights movement and the suffragette movement and being a part of the vote is very natural that she would be a part of that, but I think it's also bringing out some of her weaknesses and uncertainties about herself.
Her eyes are being opened to a world beyond the great strides and the great career that she's formed for herself. So when you bring the corset as the sort of metaphor for everything that was holding women back, and then you introduce her to her new special friend, Lillian, who doesn't wear a corset, then you get a chance for Grace to start to see a life that she could possibly have.
I doubt I have your passion.
You do. You lead by example.
It doesn't feel like enough.
Then do more. Lead by action instead.
I want to go corset free.
Now that I can help you with.
Every season on Murdoch Mysteries, we like to do a creepy episode. And what better to do a creepy episode than a murder in an asylum? What way to make it even creepier is to use some of our favorite female villains from past seasons.
I had multiple personalities stemming from a childhood trauma, and I had a very volatile personality that would come out in times of threat.
Mrs. Landy found out that her husband was philandering, so she killed him. And then she started to set up sort of a sting to see who was going to be honest with finding lost money. She appears to be a very lovely lady, but she's actually quite vicious, which I like.
The first time I was on Murdoch, I invited all of my lady friends to my cabin to have a hen party to welcome my new sister-in-law into the family. Unfortunately for everyone, I have a psychotic break. Another one, my second one.
Eva got men to kill for her in the first episode that I was in season 6, and then in season 7 she got a little greedy and she ended up killing someone herself. And I thought she went to prison, but she would care.
One of the things about bringing back characters, especially to our loyal fan base, some of our bad villains are amongst their favorites. So if we can find a realistic or justifiable reason to have them recur every once in a while, I think it helps add to the mythology of Murdoch mystery. And all of them are tremendous actresses, so why just use them once?
It's so wonderful when really great actors come on the show, which they do all the time, but when I get to work directly with them, often, Murdoch gets to do all that. In this one, it's me and 5 amazing actresses who are all really, really, really good, and so it's so much fun to play with them.
Why are you doing this to me?
Because you're vindictive and cruel. You know I don't belong in here, but you are keeping me here because you're afraid I'll take your husband.
We're in the dungeons. It's been 3 solid days of working in these asylum scenes and physical fighting and a lot of screaming and emotional people, so it's pretty intense. Because I've had an injury and I have a broken wrist, we obviously have to be extremely careful, so we have 2 stunt people who play me and play the person hurting me, and so we're doing this fabulous swapping in and out. So I'll do a bit of the scene and then she'll come and pummel them, and she'll step out and I'll step back in, and so it's actually makes for double the work, but it's fun to watch. It means I'm really badass because she makes me look really tough.
There's also not going to be a ward where patients are kept in isolation.
Can they be helped?
Well, at least they can be properly attended to.
The origins of the asylums were actually not medical at all. They tended to be developed by philanthropists and religious people who felt that there were individuals who required some kind of care, often relaxation or retreat from urban life. But over time, they sort of transformed into these large Gothic structures. Canada borrowed a lot of its ideas for asylums from the Victorian Britons, and they used these large palatial buildings, often with long wings jutting out of a central corridor. Often they were surrounded by gardens and were meant to make you feel small or kind of dwarfed as you approached them. And they tended to shut people away for long periods of time. There certainly were asylums exclusively for women, particularly in the British examples. It's difficult to know exactly how violent women would have been treated in specific instances, but it's likely, in general strokes, that they may well have been locked up in wards for quite a long time. There was very little in terms of rehabilitation.
Well, I think it's great whenever we touch on something truly, historical and about, health or welfare of people back in the day. It is pretty dark, and it's great for stories. Dark, dark stories, but a little sad for the people.
We can't ignore the possibility that one of the other women in the ward is the killer.
What about Rose Maxwell's admissions?
She's a deluded woman, Julia. I have a duty to make inquiries.
We have a duty.
Today we're at Whitehern Historic House in Hamilton, and we've been here quite a bit, and right now we're using the exterior, at least, as the asylum.
Whitehern's located at the corner of McNabb and Jackson Streets, right beside City Hall in Hamilton. Whitehern was built in the late 1840s, about 1848, for a man named Richard Oliver Duggan. It was certainly bought by Dr. Calvin McQueston in 1852. And he and his children and his grandchildren lived in this house until 1968. So 116 years of continuous occupation in Whitehern by the McQueston family. The home was left completely intact to the city. So the furnishings, the art, the small pieces of china, everything's original in that house. We have letters and photographic documentation, so we know a tremendous amount about the family, their perceptions of themselves, their world, and how it was changing through over 100 years of history.
It's great to be able to do some horror on Murdoch Mysteries.
I'm a huge horror fan. That's why I was so excited to do this show, especially the 2 episodes I did.
Psychological horror. I like that a lot. I think it's so fun to play villains. I don't get to do it often, and it opens a whole spectrum of play.
I'm not a horror fan at all. I get so scared in movies. Even just working in this building, walking down the hallways, freaks me out.
I distinctly remember when I was younger, I would set up these horrible, macabre death scenes for my mom to walk in on, and it never worked because she always walked in and laughed. So clearly my acting needed to improve.
So in this episode, we were interested in getting a little bit into Bracken Reed's family life, and it would be kind of interesting to see what would happen if one of them came over and maybe got into a little bit of trouble and how Bracken Reed would deal with that. And while we were sort of looking at something that could relate to London and Toronto at the time and have some kind of a crossover, we found the existence of this real girl gang called the 40 Elephants, who operated in the Elephant and Castle region of London for about 200 years. They really operated this enormous shoplifting scheme all by themselves, and then would use the men to fence the goods or help them if they needed some muscle, that sort of thing. They really became famous in the 1920s with the rise of their leader called Diamond Annie, and she was infamous for wearing diamond rings all along her right fist, creating a sort of brass knuckle only with diamond rings. So we thought that would be kind of fun to use in the episode, which we do in the form of our victim.
As we know, Dr. Grace loves to go undercover, so right now we're filming a scene where I go undercover with Miss Moss to infiltrate a girl gang. I never thought a place like this existed. Stick with me and I'll show you all sorts of secrets.
We wanted to have a underground speakeasy nightclub. So we looked around extensively to find a place that would serve as a nightclub, and we found this place in Hamilton that worked perfectly because it gave us 2 different levels to shoot on. So we had a bandstand on the 2nd floor, and then the underground part of the nightclub was in the basement. I think we were the first company to film in there in years.
There's so many women, and that doesn't happen all the time, and I love that, because that's what part of the story is this season, right? The women and how we push everything forward.
It's a lot of fun working with a group of girls, and the costumes are always way more fun for girls than for guys. It's my princess outfit for this scene. I love it, and lots of good personalities and lots of good actresses.
I don't want to lose your city coroner, that's all.
I appreciate your concern, Inspector, but what I do in my free time has no bearing on my work.
The 8th season of a show, you have to take risks. And so to have Grace trying to examine who she is over the course of this season gives her character a compelling storyline. We think the Murdoch audience is mature, and we also handle stuff on the show with tact, and it's only there to benefit the growth of the character.
We just thought that Grace was in that perfect position to explore a different facet of her life, to try something new, to go on an adventure. And not only did the suffragette storyline allow her to do that, but the character of Lillian, presenting her with a different opportunity, with a different path to travel, we felt was a really interesting way to go.
Listen up, everyone. I'd like to introduce my nephew, Charlie Brackenreed. He's just arrived from London and has passed his training day with flying colours. Make him feel at home, but don't go too easy on him.
The fans always want to see a little bit more behind the scenes with Brackenreed. So this year we brought in an actor, Charlie Clements, to play his ne'er-do-well nephew, Charlie Brackenreed.
Back in, I think, season 1 or 2, I mentioned I had 3 brothers. It's nice to see somebody who's related to my family from England.
Your uncle seems very glad to have you aboard.
I hope I can match his standards, sir. He's a hell of a copper, I'm told.
I'm sure you'll do just fine.
I'm from just outside of London, and obviously Tom is from Yorkshire, or Sheffield. And I was kind of umming and ahhing whether I should keep my London accent or try and go closer to his. They tried to get us looking so similar. So I thought, if we might as well go the whole way and try and sound similar as well.
I expected him to do it Cockney because it's written that he's in London and that, and I thought he'd be a London relative, but he attempted a bit of a Yorkshire twang, so that was quite funny. It's very good casting.
I know there's an Apache in Toronto, and I bet my whole kit and caboodle that you've got it.
You know me, Inspector. Lover of curiosities and collector's items.
So right now we're talking about the Apache, and it's a French gun that was invented in the 1860s by French gang members. French gang was called Les Apaches, as in the Apaches. It's considered one of the worst weapons ever made. It's also one of the most ridiculous because it's got a stiletto knife blade, so a 3 to 4 inch blade that's very, very thin, and it's got a 8mm pinfire gun with no barrel, so the accuracy was very, very limiting, and a set of brass knuckles. So you could stab, shoot, or punch with this thing. I looked around, and there were none available in Toronto. No collectors wanted to let us have them in Canada. It came down to me building one. So the Apache you're going to see in the show is a letter opener as the knife that I cut down, filed, modified slightly to fit on the gun. It's a 3D printed frame of the gun, which I designed in the computer, and the brass knuckles, which are also 3D printed. The cylinder, the trigger are off a real 8mm pinfire gun from the turn of the century. To show you how it would work, you'd hold it like that to fire the gun, or you'd hold it like that to stab someone, and then you would fold it all down, get smaller to go in your pocket, or to punch someone.
So we're in St. Mary's today, which is about 2.5 hours outside of Toronto, near London. It's a really beautiful, cute little town with a lot of limestone, I was told on the way in, like a lot of limestone buildings.
St. Mary's is a quaint little heritage town, about 20 minutes equal distance between Stratford, Ontario and London, Ontario. St. Mary's was formed originally at the confluence of these two rivers, Grand River, the Trout River, because of water power. It has interesting history. It's the second largest baseball and bat manufacturer. The predecessor to Cooper Bats started here, hence the Baseball Hall of Fame is here. Timothy Eaton's brothers actually started here. So there were 3 Eaton brothers. They started a dry goods business here, and later Timothy left and founded the Timothy Eaton Company in Toronto. And St. Mary's is lucky enough to be in an area that has some great trails. The Grand Trunk Rail Trail exists through here, and there really is quite a spectacular bridge called the Sarnia Bridge that goes over the Grand River at quite a high elevation. There are outdoor things to do, there are cultural things to do, there are architectural sort of heritage things to see and do in this town as you wander and explore.
And all the fans are here, as you can see, which is always really fun and acknowledging.
Well, I think that St. Mary's has been one of the largest turnouts of fans that we've had so far shooting for Murdoch Mysteries this year.
They're all like, thank you so much for coming to St. Mary's, like, welcome. So it's a really fun day.
It's a little bit of an origin story for Murdoch, which is a lot of fun. We've sort of alluded to all of these things that Murdoch does or has done in the past, or places he's been and experiences that have molded and shaped him.
We need to record accurate descriptions of every body. Wives and the mothers may wish to claim them, and take note of all their possessions. I don't want anything to go missing. Here, take this notebook and pencil.
I was really interested in writing about Murdoch's childhood because I like to know why people ended up where they ended up. And so I thought, hey, this will be good, set in Nova Scotia, where he's from, and this important priest. And he got interested in detecting at that shipwreck time, so that's how it all started. Father Keegan is loosely based on someone I knew. I got my BA at what was then Assumption University, run by the Basilian Fathers. And there was one priest in particular, his name was Father Malone. And I'll never forget, he just walked in and he kind of said, okay, you've got to think now, no preconceptions, and don't just mouth off silly things to me, you've got to think. He was big on questioning. Don't just accept truisms or cliches. Question them.
Father Keegan?
Oh, my Lord. William Murdoch. It's been a long time.
Father Keegan's being played by Peter Utterbridge, who just so happens to be the man who originally played Murdoch in the television movies that inspired the series.
So this is actually my first time on the series, and it's been a lot of fun because ever since the show started, I've kind of wanted to be on the show and sort of do something interesting like that, because clearly it's shameless stunt casting.
Peter Utterbridge and I go way back. We go back to the early 80s working together. So when we proposed this Origins episode, I insisted that Peter play the character of Father Keegan. And it worked out, as I remember correctly. I'm glad that it was my idea.
We're trying not to do too much little jokey jokes, but we're doing things like we're standing the same way. We're coming to the room and say, sir, we both look at the same time. So we're trying to do. You can watch for those little tips of the hat.
We needed to find 2 churches in proximity to each other that had a period look. Luckily, in this area of Sutton, we found 2 beautiful churches.
You say you found her here this morning?
Well, yes, 7 o'clock.
Did you know her?
She's the maid at the presbytere here at St. Francis. Jeannette Rajot.
Rajot? This is her parents' grave.
Right now, we're filming at St. George's Anglican Church on Sybil Point. Sybil Point is on the south shore of Lake Simcoe. This building was built in 1876. It's the second such building on the site. And it contains in it windows actually designed and built by the daughters and wife of Governor Simcoe. The church itself is a fieldstone church. It is the church in which Stephen Leacock and his family grew up and worshipped.
This period is actually a great historical site. It's incredible. The whole thing is made out of hand-cut granite, which is, I don't know if you ever tried to handle a piece of granite, it's impossible. Quite a cool place.
Among our famous people in the cemetery. We have, of course, Stephen Leacock and his family. We also have Maison de la Roche, who wrote The White Oaks of Gelna. Some of the people who are buried here go back to the Boer War or before. Fascinating cemeteries. They are open to the public to come and peruse. St. James in Sutton is where we'll be filming the Nova Scotia scenes for this episode. It was built around 1858, also as part of the same parish. The churches are absolutely stunningly beautiful. They're very much period pieces. They haven't been spoiled by the ravages of time or modernity, and so for a period mystery such as Murdoch, they're absolutely perfect.
Right now we're in Jackson's Point. Jackson's Point is a community in the town of Georgina, and the town of Georgina is located on the southeast shores of Lake Simcoe. We're kind of right on the lake, which is fantastic, right beside Sybil Point Provincial Park, which is a very well-known Ontario provincial park as well. Lake Simcoe is an excellent lake for boating, fishing, and any kind of outdoor fun on the lake. It is connected to the Prince Severn Waterway, so we do have lots of boaters going through here and up to Aurelia and Barrie area. We have the Briars Resort. It's an excellent accommodation facility, has a lot of history there as well. The town of Georgina is a community of communities. We have many different communities located in the town: Jackson's Point, Sutton, Keswick, Pefferlaw, Eudora, and our other lakefront communities, which have a lot of great shopping and retail locations and fantastic restaurants.
The event that brings young Murdoch, that first turned him on to doing detective work, it was watching his mentor, this priest, sort out what might have happened during the storm. It was a seminal kind of event in his life as a young boy and in the priest's life that they both spend the rest of the episode kind of reflecting and remembering. So I feel the storm has to be quite powerful.
We're having a rain and wind scene, so we're having the guys put rain towers up. We have wind machines that are up on the hill. The fans come from low boat motors, the style that they use in the Bayou and the Everglades. They have V8 motors in them. They're probably about 400 horsepower. They'll do, I would say, 80-mile-per-hour winds. I'm glad I'm behind them instead of in front of them. In this scene, because the shore doesn't actually exist, we're able to put the rain stands right into shots, and then the CGI guys will come and paint them out. What we are doing is giving an interaction with the actor. So an actor can have rain hitting his face, rain hitting the ground behind him, stuff that can't be created by a computer graphic. So we take care of all of that, and they paint in the background of the storm. I believe it's going to be -2 tonight. Probably the people in front of the fans are going to feel more like a probably 25 by the time the wind starts blowing on them with the cold. It's going to be a terrible night for a lot of people. It's going to be fun, though. It's going to look amazing. That's all that matters.
It's the main event. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you from ringside.
Wrestling was basically an alternative to boxing at the time, which is to say that the same people that go to a boxing match would go to a wrestling match, with the expectation being that wrestling was real and that these men were actually fighting each other. One of the things we wanted to do with this was toy with the idea of Crabtree being the one who uncovers the fact that wrestling, as we now know it, is a stage outcome. It's more theatrical than it is athletic.
You can never beat me, Gladiator! You're nothing! I am the greatest wrestler there ever was!
I think the biggest single determining factor that made the wrestling stuff work in that episode is that I made the decision to cast wrestlers first and actors later. Having seen these guys wrestle numerous times over the past 6 or 8 months, I knew that all the wrestling sequences, they could stage them all themselves.
Obviously, it's very athletic, but there's a theatrical element. I helped choreograph most of the fight scenes, and some of us are wrestlers, and we've wrestled each other before, which makes it super easy. But some of them aren't wrestlers at all, so we had to give the quickest wrestling school lesson ever.
This is like a kind of like a big dream for me, to be doing an acting role and get to wrestle. It was a lot of fun. I've never been in a wrestling movie before, so at the end of this, I'm dropping an elbow on somebody for sure, from the top rope.
I did a nice tree fall at the end when I got smoted by a fake chair. It was fake, don't worry, it was fake, and I was proud of that.
It's been such a blast. I'm a professional wrestler, so this is not necessarily my regular element. I'm in the ring, but I'm not working with such an amazing crew and as many cameras as we have here today. So this is just magical.
We had a 5.5-hour rehearsal a couple days ago. We've got the actors doing their stuff. We've got this stunt
actor, wrestlers doing their stuff. We have Crabtree that's thrown into the mix at the end of it all. Professional wrestlers, they're basically stunt performers, right? They do the exact same things that we do, except a lot of times they don't have a camera, they have a live audience. So my biggest challenge, if you will, was to make them camera friendly as opposed to audience friendly. And they've come around no problem.
All of the guys that have been brought in to play the wrestlers and to actually do the physical wrestling have been a great bunch of guys. They're enthusiastic and energetic about it. These guys most of the time do this for no real glory. They do it because they like it. So they're happy to be here. We're happy to have them.
It's just been a whole lot of fun, and everybody's really liking it, and they're clapping, and it's a fun day at work today.
Well, we were going to use a stunt double for Johnny Harris when he gets thrown out of the wrestling ring. But Johnny being Johnny, we found that we didn't need the stunt double, and Johnny did it himself.
I feel tired and a little bit trembly. I mean, not very good shape. I mean, as you saw, that fight lasted about 30, 40 seconds, and we only did 2 takes. Yeah, there was a little flip involved. I mean, I'm more or less doing a front roll, but the ring is set up to be very loud at any impact, so that sort of helps sell the violence of it. We threw in a little nod to an episode from last season, Kung Fu Crabtree, where Crabtree learns the spinning heel kick. So he tries that on the Cossack with less success than last season. And it's turned into an atomic drop, which of course all wrestling fans will know. One guy lifts up another guy and bangs his arse against her knee. So there's comedy in that already. Anytime you get hit in the ass, that's comedy gold. I think if I hit the gym hard, I could be ready for a career in wrestling in 4 or 5 years. Who am I kidding?
It's great to be back in Dundas. Lucky for us, we were able to find this great old building and put the ring inside here.
Dundas, where Murdoch Mystery has been doing a lot of their filming lately, which we're very happy about, is actually located within Hamilton. It's the further west end of the city and certainly has a really unique history. Large manufacturing base. Dundas Creek was really a catalyst for a lot of the manufacturing that started there, but certainly over the years evolved and is what it is today, and it's got a fairly significant historic center and fine shopping and fine dining as well. They have quite a few restaurants that are very unique to Dundas. In the downtown area there, you can walk around quite easily and make a day of it with all there is to see and do there. They have the Niagara Escarpment, the waterfalls down through the Dundas Valley, so they've got that connection to the outdoor experience. So quite a thriving community.
Henderson and I had an arrangement. I do the maneuver, and he acts like it dazed him. And then I take the championship.
I think I know what you're saying, Mr. Hummer, and I think the idea of Henderson giving up his championship and a fake maneuver, difficult to believe.
Crabtree's been a constable for 8 years, and he's a good constable. He's often the one who walks into a scene with the evidence that cracks the case. We figured it only stands to reason that Crabtree would eventually be presented with an opportunity to move on, and whether he would take it or not, we thought would be an interesting world to explore.
It's an exciting prospect for Crabtree, but he's a bit torn, you know. I mean, if he gets the promotion to detective, it's at a different station house, so he'll leave Murdoch and Brackenreed and the gang there. In a way, that's sort of what he has to do, so we'll see.
How does a barber end up owning the whole building?
Simple. I save 10% of my earnings, and I never buy anything frivolous. Why put in new flooring when you can throw down a rug?
Sell that to the wife.
I'm the author of The Wealthy Barber, and I am playing a wealthy barber. And they did a great job of writing the character in a very smooth way. It's not forced at all. It's a good part of the story, and I was very impressed. Without any exaggeration, my mother is 10 times more excited that I'm on this show than I'm on Dragon's Den or that I wrote The Wealthy Barber. She couldn't care less. She's all excited about the fact that I'm on Murdoch Mysteries. This is big news.
It seemed a natural fit to have a story that was centered around the actual election day in Ontario. Of course, the storyline that we came up with involving Margaret Hale's name not being on the ballot is fictional, but it is true that she won 79 votes in real life, which we think is pretty amazing considering that women couldn't vote. These were 79 men who voted for a female candidate. As far as we know, she was really the first woman to run for office in all of the British Commonwealth. So it's kind of a huge deal and the perfect thing for Grace and Ogden to sink their teeth into.
Good day, Dr. Nesbitt, Mr. Martyr.
Dr. Ogden, whatever are you ladies doing here?
The same as you, gentlemen.
Not quite the same thing. We are here to cast our own votes, after all.
I hear it's to be a tight race today.
Yes, between Mr. Martyr and I. May the best man win.
A lot of, obviously, female fans have been really receptive to the story. A lot of them have always said that they found Dr. Ogden and Dr. Grace women that they look up to, and we do a good job of representing girls and girl power. And I've always felt that way about the characters being such strong-minded, smart, intelligent women, not only for the time period, but in general.
I love the fact that we have this really long arc of the suffragette story, because if it just popped in for one episode, we could never really have seen the outcomes and how difficult it was. And so I'm just really proud that they decided to do that.
Good morning, Margaret. It's a fine day to make history, Lillian.
Margaret, I don't know what happened. One of our supporters just told me that your name isn't on the ballot.
How can that be? I'll telephone Clara Brett Martin.
My very first day of work on Murdoch Mysteries in season 5, I walked in and said, there was a lady lawyer, and her name was Clara Brett Martin, and she was the first female lawyer, certainly in the British Commonwealth. So finally this year we had the perfect place for her with, you know, our band of suffragettes. She just fit in perfectly. She, in real life, actually did campaign for Margaret Hale, which is a really neat fact. So we have all these strong women in Toronto history who really did know each other and really did work together to try to break those barriers. It was a lot of fun to work on the suffragette storyline, especially as a woman and one of the female writers in the writer's room. I really had a great time getting into the background of all of that and learning about the suffragette movement at the time. And the fight was far from over. There was a lot more work for them to do back in 1902, and since women in Canada didn't get the vote until 1917, I'm sure there's a lot more struggle for Ogden and Grace to pursue in the coming years.
Didn't I see you this morning? You've already voted. Constable, this man is attempting to vote illegally.
Well done, Emily.
We are in Brantford in front of the beautiful Carnegie Library. It's a lovely spot with a beautiful park, great for fans to sit and partake in all the action.
We're in Brantford, Ontario. It's about an hour west of Toronto. So the Carnegie Building is a true gem in downtown Brantford. Andrew Carnegie was an American industrialist and philanthropist, and he had a lifelong interest in public libraries and self-education. So in 1902, the city of Brantford actually requested $30,000 to build the library. The building itself is one of the few remaining Carnegie libraries of such size and expense, and it's right here in the city of Brantford. Brantford has a very rich heritage district. A lot of people come here for downtown walking tours, and they will see the Victoria Heritage Park and the various monuments throughout the downtown core. We're also known as the Telephone City for Alexander Graham Bell. His homestead is here in Brantford. The Sanderson Centre for the Performing Arts is a beautiful, fully restored theatre. It opened originally in 1919. The auditorium is completely authentically restored to its 1919 glory. Also downtown is the Brantford Farmers Market. It's open on the weekends and on Thursdays, and there's lots of local food there that's really good. There's also the Grand River. It is a Canadian heritage river. You'll find people kayaking and canoeing along it, and along the Grand River is our trail system. We have over 70 kilometres of groomed trails that connect us to Port Dover, Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo. We're known as the hub of Ontario trails for that reason.
What are you doing here, Myers?
The much more compelling question is, what are you doing here, Murdoch?
I'm investigating the death of one Plantagenet McCarthy.
Plantagenet McCarthy is dead?
Terrence Myers, back amongst us. I love Peter. I love hanging out with him. We always have a laugh. I love working with him.
It's always fun to have Terrence Myers on the show. Last year we had a very serious story with Myers where he was implicated in a murder in The Spy That Came Up from the Cold. And this year we thought we'd just reset him and take him back to the kind of nefarious skullduggery that he's so good at and so well known for on our show.
I think this is about the 6th or 7th time I've done Terrence Myers. What I always tried to do was channel James Bond to try to be uber cool, but he's obviously not, because he doesn't always get it right and he screws up.
He exposed himself precisely to hide himself. Some things you have yet to learn, Inspector.
Brackenreed always gets a bit relegated. He's never really sure what's going on. And Terrence Myers plays him with such droll aplomb that it's really good. But it always gets a bit like Smiley's People, you know, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and I'm always out of the loop, really.
I think my character's job is always to make it look more complicated than it really is, perhaps. And with the right amount of sleuthing, a.k.a. Murdoch, they always seem to get it right at the end.
It's a sport we have on Murdoch to try to take a film that we know and turn it into a Murdoch. And in this case, it was The Hunger Games. We all agreed it was a great premise and it would make a great mystery.
Inevitably, our hero gets entangled in it somehow and gets placed into the race. It's a fun episode, and it's a great twist for us to add the name Artful Detective in there, as our show has been called in some places. One of the things that we do to trap one of the bad guys, Murdoch does a bit of a Murdoch trap, and there are 10 Murdochs all of a sudden in one place, and that throws off the hunter, and Murdoch's able to get the drop on him and actually taser him.
I invented this some time ago, but it proved to be somewhat cumbersome for daily use.
What is that?
It's a weaponized capacitor. It delivers an electrical shock by way of these darts.
I had to build a period taser for the episode, and all I had was a single line in the script that said, it's a gun with a capacitor, possibly a suitcase with batteries in it, and this is what I came up with. So this is a real dart gun that fires darts if you wanted to put down a hippo or a horse, and we made fake batteries. These are the capacitors that we put on it. You can see I've got a couple fishing reels here which hold the electrical cables. And then inside the tubes, we've got the darts.
Male, approximately 30 years old. He was shot several times. Time of death between 9 and 11 p.m.
Ultimately, we are at whodunit, and there's always a dead body, but in this one we go over the top, so there's a lot of dead body. And I think for the two of us, Dr. Grace and Dr. Ogden, they're sort of in their element, stuck in with all the dead bodies and the gore.
My first season, I had a pickled snake put in front of me, so it was real, but it was dead. And I had to cut it open and pull a fake gerbil out. And I was like, I can freak out about this, but I gotta do it, right? And now I'm really used to it. I've held rats, there's a lot of blood. Sometimes with the makeup, it's so amazing that it's a bit unsettling when you see it at first. Those wounds are incredible, but I'm totally fine. Now I'm just excited what I get to dig my hands into next.
The office of the coroner was established in Ontario in the 1700s, so there have been coroners for a very long time. Pathology became a specialty later on. But in fact, in those days, all doctors knew about pathology because that's in fact how medicine learned about diseases and injuries and how they affect the body. The first full-time female forensic pathologist in Ontario was Dr. Chitra Rao. She began her career in 1981 and she is still practicing. In Ontario, usually two people help in death investigation. There's the medical coroner who goes to the scene, and there's the forensic pathologist who does the autopsies. More recently, forensic pathologists have also been named coroners to go to the scenes of suspicious deaths and homicides. Forensic pathologists are experts in diseases and injuries that cause people to die suddenly. What we do is we act as consultants to other doctors, to other investigators, and we help them learn the truth about what happened to the patient.
It's been really cool as a job because it's not just learning lines. I really have to understand what I'm talking about to be able to say it convincingly, and that aspect has been really fun for me.
So here we are in Kitchener. It's been really cold, so I hope everybody really enjoys these episodes because we've been freezing.
Kitchener is about 75 kilometers west of Toronto, but we have lots to see and do. There's 3 markets. Cambridge has one of the oldest farmers markets in Canada. Kitchener has one of the only urban markets in this area, and the St. Jacobs Farmers Market is probably the best known. We have the Waterloo Central Railway, which runs between Waterloo and St. Jacobs. All through Waterloo region, there's trails. The Grand River has a number of areas that you can camp or just visit, and you can see the West Montrose Kissing Bridge, which is one of the oldest covered bridges in Ontario. Really quite a sight.
George, the detective is waiting on my report. What am I supposed to tell him?
You do what you must.
George, please talk to me. What are you hiding? What's going on?
Things have been going swimmingly for Crabtree, and here on the last episode, it all goes to hell.
It was a little bit of a shock. I said, wow, this is a hell of a cliffhanger, and I think the fans are going to really like it, but I mean, it came out of nowhere.
The season ending with Crabtree is really interesting. I haven't been told yet what the outcome will be, but it certainly doesn't look good for him.
Constable George Crabtree, you are under arrest for murder of Sergeant Archibald Brooks.
Here we are, another one down, season 8 done. I'm just really grateful. This is real emotional sort of nights, sort of wrap up a whole season. I'm just really grateful to everybody and all of the sort of above and beyond that everyone does on the show.
It's a heavy scene to end the season on. And now it's sort of like all the pressure has come off. I'm delighted.
Oh, it's great. So much fun. It's such an awesome season to finish on. So dramatic and all of us. Yeah. It's been awesome, and thank you to everyone for watching everything. And yeah, till next year.
End of season. 5 minutes to go, and I'm back to me already. The young Tom, not the old Tom.
It's great to be finished this season of Murdoch, but we're already starting to think about next year in Murdoch and where else there is for us to discover in Ontario.